So in this video, I'm going to cover something that was based on a question that I was asked. And it's actually a good question because it's a question I'm always asked, and that is, how do you deal with someone with reach? And let's face it, you know, unless you're like the mountain from Game of Thrones or you're some professional basketball player, there's always probably somebody taller than you or somebody with more reach. I mean, it's just the way it is. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to demonstrate the things that I do and things I show people when they're dealing with somebody with reach. And by the way, I have the same problem too. If I'm dealing with somebody who's, you know, 6'5" or even 6'2", but they have a longer reach than me, it's a problem for me. So I got my good friend Anthony here, and as you can see, I have a serious advantage over Anthony. So if Anthony's standing there and I'm standing even kind of catty corner, so you can see, just by extending my arm, is right, so he's already hit. That kind of sucks for him. But the other thing is, if his arm is extended because I'm taller than him, my height also becomes a part of my reach, because he has to also overcome the fact that he's got to be able to deal with the fact that it's easier for me using my height to kind of, you know, bob and weave out of the way of things. So one of the things I want to go over real quick is just this understanding that when you're dealing with someone who has reach over you, the key is the one place you don't want to be, please stay there, my friend, is you don't want to be standing right here. You know, in other words, if he's standing here, even though he's close enough where he can now start tagging me a little, all things being equal, because, you know, my arm is longer than his, is if he's throwing a punch at the same time I'm throwing a punch, I'm going to get there first because my arm is longer, relatively speaking. In other words, it's kind of like if my arm is here and his arm is here, but my arm is longer, my arm, even if they're moving at the same time, is always going to get there first. And it's the same thing for me, like I said, when I'm dealing with somebody who has much more size and reach over me. So the first thing I get people to understand is, no matter what, don't stand right in front of them. The one place, again, you don't want to be is where the hands are. Now, most people, when they fight with their hands. Very few people really know, especially under, you know, dynamic situations, how to really use their legs. And you got to practice using your legs, because, you know, most people, they're kind of moving, you know, and they're not just standing there waiting for you, unless, of course, you know, you sucker punch them, or they're playing this game like, well, what are you going to do? You know, then, you know, they might as well put their head on a T-ball and let me hit it with a bat, you know? So as I'm working with Anthony, first thing I get people doing is understanding that you don't want to play out here. Step back a little bit, my friends. You don't want to play out here and play kickboxer with me or with somebody who's got greater reach, because it's just too easy for me to do these kind of things or just start windmilling on you. The other thing is, at this distance, what you're doing is you're giving me the opportunity to close this space as well. So you don't want to do that. So the first thing I get people comfortable with is not reaching out and overextending their own arms, because of the fact that by overextending your own arms, you're just giving your arms up and you're playing into my game. This is my game here. So what I actually get people learning is how to keep their arms somewhere within this kind of natural range of motion. As you see how boxers, when they move, and I want to point out, I'm only using boxing and sport fighting as an analogy, because it's just easier to explain it this way. But understand, in a real situation, people just do what they want. So, you know, all this business that I see on the internet of, oh, how do I deal, you know, with a jab or a straight punch, or how do you deal with a hook punch and stuff? I'm not saying people don't do that. I mean, bad guys watch the UFC too, but the reality is, who are you fighting? Let's be serious. Who are you fighting? So when people say, well, how do you deal with a good striker or a good kicker? Who are you fighting? Who are you picking fights with on the street, or who are you anticipating fighting on the street? I'm not saying there are people who don't know how to do these things. What I'm saying is, you know, if a guy's like this with me and he looks like he's got some skill, that's a different thing. But 99%, 0.9% actually, of the people who are committing crimes, who are assaulting people, we just saw a horrific assault with multiple attackers, and women were even involved, you know, in Cincinnati. Not one of those persons who were involved in assaulting these people looked like they had any skill whatsoever. But they overwhelmed them, and they just started windmilling them, and they just started kicking them. My point is, that is actually closer to the reality of what 99.9% of all altercations look like. There's people going for it. So you have to get this idea out of your head of, you know, how do I deal with a good striker? How do I deal with a boxer? How do I deal with a grappler? The person you're dealing with, they don't care about any of that. They're just going off, and you just need to learn how to deal with movement and motion, and I'll cover that in the subsequent video. So in here, I just try to get people comfortable in here, understanding that I still, if I want to hit them, I still have to kind of close this distance some kind of way, whether either with my arm or having to move my body. And that everybody's hands, the good point is, everybody's hands are always long enough to protect their head, protect their throat, and protect the more vital areas. So by getting comfortable with being able to protect your head, protect your neck, protect your throat, 99% of everything you need to do is already covered. Does it mean that you won't get hit? No, that's just unrealistic. However,